Welcome back to the Beer Temple. I am Chris Quinn. With me yet again is Michael Kaiser from Good Beer Hunting. We're talking about our trip to the 2014 Shelton Brothers Festival in California.
The festival.
The festival. The festival. And we were talking with the Shelton Brothers people about importing and exporting, but we were also sat down and talked to some brewers, and there were a few that we had pointed out and were kind of, you know, getting giddy about.
I was giddy. Yeah, I was giddy.
Me particularly about this first one. We sat down with the owner of and creator of Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales. I think maybe the first brewer to use that Artisan Ale.
Might have been
one of them. Yeah. Ron Jefferies, and somebody who I felt really was one of the creators of this American wild ale category.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was just I just wanted to hear what this guy had to say. I think
he's
so
a bit of an
important.
enigma to me.
Yeah.
Because I mean, everything he's done, he's built that so slowly.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I think over time kind of gives him almost this legendary status as being one of those, being one of our first American wild breweries. And I got the chance to go to his new production area last year sometime in Dexter, and being able to see how big that program's gotten. I mean, you can salivate over it. There's just barrels for days. There's fooders of various sizes and shapes, some that are ovular and about 6 feet tall, other ones that seem like they're 20 to 30 feet tall. I'm probably exaggerating at that point, but it feels that big because you're not used to seeing so many of them. It was really a pretty special operation.
And one thing, take note of this, is because you're going to be hearing it again and again, but Ron Jefferies says it first, how thankful he is for Shelton Brothers. And what we didn't really hit on too much with the people from Shelton Brothers is the fact that they not only import beers from overseas to our shores or from outside our country in, they also kind of do distribution.
Yeah,
distribution. And for someone like Jolly Pumpkin, who was a decade ahead of the curve in terms of the style of beer he was making, he needed Shelton Brothers. There were not enough sour beer drinkers in Dexter, Michigan to keep him going.
There still aren't. Right. I mean, most brands that are starting up now, even when they're in urban areas, are still going through a domestic importer in order to get their stuff to the these niche populations in urban areas around the country.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to do that 10 years ago. I mean, it must have felt like he won the lottery when he got his first distribution deal.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, without that, I think there is no such thing as Jolly Pumpkin.
I couldn't agree more, and I think you're going to see this again and again, even with breweries that are very popular and very sought after on a national scale. The fact that they can be distributed throughout the country is still vital to them. And
I mean, if you compare the size of the United States to Europe in general,
sure.
I mean, it's a bit like getting Belgians into France, into Spain. I mean, those things have to get around because of the limited population that's available to drink them up locally. Local has never mattered in the same way that it does in the States, and I think we see that in a certain striation of the market, which is American wild sours. They have to be an imported brand, even if it's next door.
Yeah. And this guy was certainly one of the first. Really cool opportunity, guys. You're watching one of the founding fathers of sour beer in America. So listen to what this guy has to say and enjoy it. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Hi, I'm Ron Jefferies, founder of Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales, and I'm here at the Shelton Fest 2014.
Ron, thanks so much for joining us. We were talking yesterday when we were walking around here about how strong some of the connections are between the brewers that are actually here. That it's not just any festival where they happen to be, that so many of them come here because they know each other, they want to be around each other and spend some time together. Then we started realizing how many of them probably look to breweries like Jolly Pumpkin as sort of like a major inspiration point for them, especially some of the younger guys that are entering in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
What's it like to walk around this hall right now and compare what you see in the sort of artisanal beer world with what it was when you started out so many years ago?
It's awesome. It blows me away. There's so many great beers, and these little artisan breweries are just making some really phenomenal, really interesting beers. And a lot of the guys doing the wild and sour and the barrel aging thing, and girls too. Sorry, guys and girls, of course, doing the wild barrel thing. But also some really nice, great hoppy beers, lower, more sessionable hoppy beers that are just so. I don't know. It blows me away. I'm just continually amazed. It really makes you step up your own game, actually. I mean, I go around, I taste these beers, and I'm like, oh shit. Now what am I gonna do?
Well, how did you do what you do? Because back then you couldn't walk around a festival like this and taste those kinds of beers.
I have a strange brain and I like to think, creative imagination. So I really imagineered a lot of these beers. And no one was doing, well, maybe some people were doing things like we were doing, Cantillon and other breweries, but I didn't know them, and I couldn't really reach out and say, hey, how do I do this? How do I make spontaneously fermented sour beer that tastes good? What techniques do I use? What do I not do? How does it all work? And so really at Jolly Pumpkin, we had to figure this out for ourselves. There weren't articles in New Brewer like there are now. There weren't, obviously Vinny was getting started too, and Tommy was starting up his stuff, but we were all, and Allagash all started doing sour stuff. We all kind of started around the same time in the early 2000s with, getting heavily into oak aging and the naturally occurring wild yeast. But we didn't know each other back then, and we didn't know what the other people were doing. So it was it's interesting when we get together now and we talk about how many things we do the same and how many things we do different and how great the beers are. It's really
You all
exciting.
ended up taking kind of a similar approach in the end?
Yeah, there's more similarities than differences. It's pretty amazing, but I guess that's brewing. There's a lot of variation, a lot of ways to get from point A to point B, but most of them are pretty similar because if you want to make great beer, you kind of have to do a couple of things.
Yeah.
Right. And was it really just trial and error back in the day when now I was just looking up and I saw Chad Jacobson from Crooked Stave, who did his master's dissertation on Brettanomyces.
But he has a website called Brettanomyces.com or whatever.
And for you, was it, did you, how much of, about these kind of bugs, quote unquote, did you understand? Did you, I know back in the day they used to put the magic brewing stick in the wort and it made it funky.
Right.
Where were you back in terms of your knowledge base for?
Well, I had been brewing professionally for 10 years when I started Jolly Pumpkin, and I had studied brewing science for a few years before that. So I had worked in small breweries all the time. I knew that that's where I liked to be. I have a little bit more of an artisan approach than, say, Chad, who has a very scientific approach to it. I work with what I see and taste and smell, and sort of a little bit, so maybe more old school. I did have a lot of science in school. I was working on a Master's of Science when I got hired to work in my first brewery, so I certainly understand that sort of stuff, but it's not necessarily the way I approach it. I approach it in a creative way, but in an artisan way, and with a knowledge of the science. If you don't know the science, it's really hard to repeatedly make good beer, whether it's wild and sour beer or not. And so you have to understand that and bring it into play. But other than that, we didn't have a lot of opportunity for error because we're a really small company. It was just my wife and I and our son when we started, and we didn't have any money. We started on a shoestring that was way too small, but or thin of a shoestring. It's probably better.
Especially making beers that you can't exactly just turn and burn.
Exactly,
right.
And that nobody really knew about, and it was this vacuum in the market for sour beer, and that's why I thought, hey, this is a no-brainer. Nobody's doing this.
Was it a vacuum from a consumer standpoint as well? Were they asking for this stuff?
No. Very few people were. We were really fortunate in that one of the first states that we distributed in outside of Michigan, because we quickly realized that we couldn't sell enough beer in Southeast Michigan to stay in business doing what we were doing. So we started looking out of state, and we were very fortunate our first year at the Great American Beer Festival to win a gold medal and attract some attention from the press and from some distributors around the country. Nobody knew me. At that point I had worked at smaller breweries, mostly brew pubs, and so from the outside it was like, where did this guy come from that's making these phenomenal beers in a vacuum out in Dexter, Michigan? What is going on? And so there was this curiosity that really helped us. We had a lot of articles written about us, and some distributors were interested, and one was in Florida. My wife's family are all from Florida and in Florida, and so it made perfect sense. We were going down there 3 times a year at least anyway. We could support the brand and visit family and do all of that. And so that distributor understood what we were trying to do. He was a Shelton Brothers distributor, and one time Dan was on a market visit down there, and Tom, that was the distributor's name, he said, Dan, you really have to try this guy's beer. I think he gets it. I think you're going to really dig what he's doing. And Dan did. He liked what we were doing, and we were new. We weren't where we are now, but we were on the right path, so to speak. And so Dan called me up and he said, "I think I can help you." And I was like, "Me?" That's awesome, you know. And I got really super excited. And Dan is through Dan Shelton and his distribution network around the country, and his passion for what he does that kept us in business. That made people aware of our beer all around the country and got it to where it needed to be, where there were consumers.
Yeah. And now you have a new facility in Dexter.
Yeah. Well, it's an old building that we rehabbed and turned into a much larger.
New for you, and it's huge compared to...
It's 5 times the size of the old brewery, the production floor.
Wow.
And then we have 20,000 square feet of office and pub on top of that. We opened a tasting room out there and 5,000 square feet of it. So we've got even some more room. As soon as we build up the foot traffic.
You're nowhere near occupying that whole space.
Restaurant, right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. Just getting back to what you were mentioning before, we were just talking to Jonathan and Robert from Shelton Brothers, and it reminds me of something beneficial that Shelton Brothers does for the breweries themselves. They get the beer into the right markets.
Yeah.
If there's not enough people who need spontaneously fermented beer in Dexter, Michigan, you know, these guys Dan Shelton can say, you know what though, there are enough people in the eastern U.S. and I can take this and kind of spread it about.
Right, because it's unreasonable to expect that you could ever sell that much, all of your beer in just Michigan, when it's such a niche market, or at least the idea of converting an entire region to being, you know, to the palate, to being your consumer is that's a very long-term play. In the meantime, you need to find these little pockets of very specific niche sort of palates around the country.
And making it a national brand.
An efficient way to service them.
Yeah, and that's what Dan did for us. So without Dan's help, without the help of Shelton Brothers, you know, we wouldn't be here today. So it's been a great partnership to work with them and to see things go so well for them with all the new artisan brewers around the world that are popping up, that are looking to the States and our craft scene for inspiration, and having Dan being able to help them and bring them here, and again do what he's been able to do for us, for them. It's just really, you know, not to gush on about it, but he's just been so great for what we do, our little niche of the industry, and what all the other brewers here do. And it's just, without Dan, it would be so different. The country would be so different.
And are you part of their export program, going overseas now?
We do some exporting. We don't work a lot with Shelton Brothers on the exporting, but we have been talking with Dan about that. Mostly we've been doing the export ourselves. And it's tough. There's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
So it'll be great if we can figure out a way to work more with them.
And what do you like about the idea of sending your stuff overseas?
Well, the idea with Jolly Pumpkin is as maybe ridiculous and grand as it seems, but way back when we started, the idea was to be an international boutique brand, like Cantillon, known all around the world, but with small, limited production, but this exquisite beer that is maybe more art than beer. And that was a vision for the company. And so as we grew, I like to joke that we for a long time were the smallest exporting brewer in the U.S. I was one of the first or founding members of the BA Export Development Program panel that they had. I was on that, and I have been on that from the beginning because
How long ago was that?
I don't remember when that group first started up. It's part of the Brewers Association and it's one of their committees. But I have been on it from the beginning because it was really important for me. I don't think you can be an international boutique brand if you're not at least somewhat available outside of the U.S. And so that's why we got involved in that from the beginning, even if we were just shipping relatively small amounts to Europe or Canada or wherever it was. At least we were getting beer out there. Now we send beer to Brazil and Hong Kong, as well as Europe and Canada, and we're looking for some other markets too. I met some great people at the festival already who do exporting into different parts of Asia and Malaysia and stuff like that. So we're pretty excited about the future.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's pretty cool. Tiny little piece of Dexter, Michigan out abroad. Absolutely, yeah. If you wanted to open this up, I had a question. You're talking a lot about beer that's more art than science in a way, or more art than beer. And a question I have in general is, you know, with blending being so much of what you do, it's not all just single barrel bottles, you know. So when you're blending, are you kind of blending the taste, and then as much as there is, that's as big as the batch is, or do you have a batch size that you need to hit beforehand, if I'm making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of both. A lot of the seasonals that we do, we take pre-orders for. So wholesalers will order a certain amount that they think they can sell. And so in that sense, I have that target of what you're saying. I need to create this volume of beer. We also have batch sizes. We have our 10-barrel original brew house that I still brew on, and we have our 50-barrel brew house that we do 50-barrel batches. We have our 10-barrel foeders. We have smaller, regular quote-unquote size oak barrels, and then we have some 100-barrel foeders. So we have all these different vessels that we play with in batch sizes to try to get as close as we can to the pre-orders. And then from there, I do the blending and try to get to that. And sometimes we have a little more, sometimes we have a little less, because at that point, it is all about the flavor of the beers, and then taking the different smaller barrels and the smaller foeders and the larger foeders, and I'll create blends of those, and I just write down the notes of what goes into where and what percentages, and then I give them to the cellar guy, and if it's like a really big headache, like I need a third of this in this tank and half of this in the other tank, and then push this beer back into that tank, I'll always say, I'm really sorry, Caleb, but here's what you have to do this week. But he's great about it, and he loves it. He's as into the sour beer, and what happens when you blend is you get these synergies of flavor, and you create a beer that is better and rounder and more full and more depth of flavor than
it gets a lot of great structure to it when it hits right.
Absolutely, than with a single barrel or a single batch. And so really now at the new facility, everything we do is blended. It's the same recipe, so we're drinking the Fuego del Otoño now, and it's our fall beer that we do every year that's brewed with Michigan chestnuts. But this is a blend of large foeders and some small barrels, and again, this is just taste to taste is how I do it. La Roja is still blended 10 barrels at a time. They'll pull samples from say 30 or 40 barrels, and I'll taste them all and create a blend. And that is more to taste than to volume, because I find the taste that I'm looking at, and if it's a lot of volume, everybody cheers and claps because La Roja is chronically back ordered. And if it's just the normal 10 barrel batch, everyone's like, yeah, nice job, Ron. That one's tasting good too. So it really, we use all different techniques. It really is beer specific.
That is so fascinating that there are then significant batch size variants based on what you're blending, and I, as a retailer, absolutely see it and am completely ignorant to why. I'm just like, they're out of La Roja again, or man, we've had La Roja pretty steady for the past 4 or 5 months now, and it's interesting to see that it's just because of the batch size that you were able to make.
I mean, when I visited, it was about a year ago I came through, and Charlie showed me around, and I was amazed when I walked in at how many different formats of wood you had. Like it looked more like a wood vessel collection facility than it did a brewery.
Old wood junkyard.
Barrels, multiple sides of foeders, some that were ovular and upright, some that were tall and sort of tapered at the top, and other ones that were big and wide. And yeah, I mean, it just kind of looks like you collect wood.
We do. We buy as much used as we can, and when you're buying used foeders in particular, they come in all different sizes because they're all custom made for the wineries, and so all the wineries are different, and they have different size requirements and different size cellars and different tanks that will work in their cellars and won't work. And so when you're buying them used, you get this whole menagerie of different sizes. We also find that different barrels work better for different beers. And so for La Roja, for example, I use all old bourbon barrels. But they're not bourbon barrels that are freshly dumped at the distillery, because I'm not looking for bourbon flavor in La Roja. But these are bourbon barrels that have been used by other breweries. We've been getting a lot from Founders lately. They have a couple of bourbon-influenced beers that are really popular. And so after they use those barrels once or twice, I'll take them, I'll do La Roja into them, and then we'll just blend that, because there will still be a little bourbon in there. So we'll kind of meter that out, and eventually they become neutral and just really great houses or homes for the wild yeast and the souring bacteria, and make beautiful La Roja after that.
That's great. Wonderful.
Anything else for you? No, that was awesome. Thanks so much for stopping by. It was a pleasure to get to listen to a bit more of that story.
Pleasure talking with you guys.
Anything you've had while you were here for the last day and a half that really blew your mind?
Oh man, there's so much great beer here. If anybody listens to this and thinks, gosh, should I go to 2015? The answer is yes, you should. I can't just name one, because if I do, everybody else whose beer I've been tasting is awesome is going to go, Ron, why didn't you pick me? And
what's the next beer you're going to taste? Maybe you can tell us that.
Okay, there's an Italian beer up here called Lupulo. Or no, I'm sorry, it's not Italian. It's Spanish. A Spanish brewery. They have a Lupulo that was really great. And then St. Adaris is on the way back, a long way back to my booth. And if they still have beer, I'm going to try one of theirs because I had one last night that was just phenomenal.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
My
Ron.
pleasure. Thanks, guys.